Stop the world!
Welcome to Stop the World. I'm David Rowe.
And I'm Justin Bassing.
So today we are going to talk to each other. Justin and I are going to rant about the issues of the week. It's been a huge week in news, Justin. We've had the Anthony Albanese, Donald Trump meeting, of course, dominating the headlines, understandably, here in the United States. But we've had some other interesting developments as well. I mean, a few things out of that. You know, obviously there's a critical minerals deal. There is the, Trump's commentary around Xi Jinping and Taiwan, and of course AUKUS and that affirmation of AUKUS that came up. Some other big news that's broken overnight is Trump has finally, thankfully, put some fresh sanctions on Russia, on Russian energy in response to its recalcitrance over Ukraine. And then we're going to get on to another story of a favourite story of the week that mightn't have got as much attention as we think it deserves. So that'll be the flow of the morning, and it's just going to be a very free-flowing, frank conversation. We may agree on some things and disagree on others, but that's where the fun starts. So let's talk about the Trump-Albanese meeting first. I think we'll dispense with the commentary around Kevin Rudd's performance and Donald Trump's reaction to him. I think that's been covered. Every sensible person seems to agree that basically Rudd has done a good job here if you look at the outcomes rather than the process and the optics. But let's talk a little bit about the critical minerals deal first. That was the big concrete thing. Seems like a great agreement, obviously in Australia's interests. The key point being that it will start to erode and hopefully be the beginning of breaking China's monopoly and stranglehold over critical minerals and rare earths, which it has demonstrated repeatedly. And you can tell us a little bit about the history of that. Its willingness to weaponize that and use it as a tool of economic coercion against other countries, a range of countries. That's a really important step. So just give me your thoughts on the critical minerals deal first.
Yeah, Dave, I think while AUKUS got obviously a lot of the coverage, the critical minerals deal is significant, absolutely in both countries' national interest. In my view, it's really putting substance for the first time on a topic that we've known for years is vital to our national interests. You can go back to Trump's first term, where he was engaging with then Prime Minister Turnbull on critical minerals. In 2018, they signed what they referred to as a critical minerals alliance. Yep. So we've known for a long time that it's important. That alliance, that agreement, that engagement was also premised on the concerns around China's monopoly around rare earth exports and processing. We have a situation where the reality is Australia has a huge amount of natural resources, but we don't do the processing, we don't do the exporting, and so we have all given China, unfortunately, the opportunity to create a monopoly, and then they have gained leverage, and then they show that they can use it. Frankly, if the country that had such a monopoly was Japan, or our European partners, it wouldn't matter so much. And we wouldn't have to put these billions of dollars that we're putting into trying to get ourselves out of this problem. But it's not one of our allies or strategic partners. It's our strategic adversary, who just happens to be our largest trading partner. And to give a sense of how China has used its control over rare earths, we don't have to just look in the last couple of weeks where they have imposed themselves on the entire world by saying they were going to restrict the exports of rare earth elements and restrict or ban equipment that is used to process rare earths. If you go back to 2010, in a dispute between China and Japan over the Senkaku Islands, China's response was not just to maturely, bilaterally engage on the disputed island, but was to economically coerce Japan by banning the exports of rare earths against Japan. Japan, to its credit, took China to the WTO, and 4 years later in 2014, the WTO issued a ruling against China. So they've got history. So that's why is it important that we do this now, Dave? We are a long way behind. It is going to take years to get ourselves out of it, but the only way we're going to get ourselves out of it is by governments like Australia and the US coming together, combining what our natural and national expertise is in terms of what we have to offer here in terms of resources, the American capabilities, the American finances, as well as, importantly, what the statement also said referred to not just bilaterally, but Japan, Korea, European Union. Very, very important.
Yeah. And one of the cautionary responses that's been fairly widespread, not a criticism, but at least the injection of caution has been that, this is a small step towards a big solving a big problem, that it's going to take a really long time for this to take effect. There was the Reserve Bank of Australia research paper that was reported widely yesterday. I'm quoting from the Australian Financial Review here that says, quoting the RBA research paper, while it is possible that demand for critical minerals could grow rapidly, supply is largely fixed in the short run because it takes a long time to develop mines. It can take critical mineral projects more than 10 years to go from the exploration to the production stage, though this time period can vary by mineral and price incentives. So, obviously, this is not going to solve the problem overnight. I mean, my very strong view is that doing nothing is clearly not an option. We cannot allow an indefinite future in which a strategic adversary or rival has such a stranglehold over something that is so important. I mean, you mentioned going back to 2018. I mean, critical minerals and rare earths have only become more important to almost everything that we do now. I mean, they were a relatively niche topic back then, 7 years ago. Today, you hear about them, you read about them every single day, and for very, very good reason. And we have been working on this for a while across the board. I mean, among allies, Madeleine King, some kudos to her as the resources minister, put out a critical minerals strategy several years ago. I mean, do we wish that these things were moving faster? Do we wish that this was on a larger scale? Of course. Some of the strategic investments from the two governments here are going into existing projects, is my understanding. So it's not as if we're starting from the exploration stage. Yeah. It's not as if we're going to send out geologists to start digging in the dirt and looking for a place to mine. I mean, this is this will start to make a material difference, I would think, fairly quickly.
Yes, it will. But the RBA report. Others are absolutely right that this is not going to suddenly sign this agreement and tomorrow everything is going to be okay. There's not going to be a monopoly that China has that they can use against us and the rest of the world. We're going to have to be persistent. And each time we have looked at this before, the world has thrown curveballs against us. If we have a look at what's happened in the last few years since that initial US-Australia agreement on critical minerals, we had COVID. And of course, COVID took all the energy it took top priority. As we came out of COVID, Russia invaded Ukraine. The Middle East crisis. It is one of those things that what we're going to have to do here is to show that we have the persistence to last over the course of the decade to regain that competitiveness that we have lost. And it's not just in this field of rare earths or critical minerals that you use the phrase, and a lot of people say, well, don't really know what it means. And then they particularly hear, well, rare earths are called rare, but they're not even rare, so do I really need to bother? In all these fields, where rare earths, critical minerals, the tech that it goes into, really vital now to what we do. And in a tech-related field, if you go back to 2011 when Elon Musk was developing electric vehicles, high tech, and he and Tesla were ahead of the game. He was asked in 2011, would China be a competitor to what you were doing? And at the time he said no. Of course, now 15 years on from that, Chinese companies like BYD are selling more cars, more electric vehicles than Tesla. Yeah. And the Tesla vehicles are using Chinese batteries. So we need to be mindful that China looks at this. They would have looked at what Musk was doing with electric vehicles in 2011 and saying, we're going to spend the next decade working on our own capabilities. And it's not just electric vehicles, whether it be solar panels or drones, whatever it is, social media, the work they put into TikTok. China, you have to respect what the Chinese system does because they're willing to say, if it doesn't work overnight, it doesn't matter. We're going to persist and we're going to change course where we need to. we're going to dominate these fields that we know are relevant for society and security. And so we've got to show that if something doesn't happen overnight, then we don't say, well, we tried and we failed. We've got to persist for years.
This is a really good point. So it's good stuff. We need more of it, and let's stick with it. Let's follow it through successive elected governments as well. Let's not change course with governments.
And this is a great start. Money, the $8.5 billion worth. That's what is needed. So there is substance here. It's not just an agreement, but we have to be willing to do it over years.
Great. Okay, AUKUS. John Phelan, the Navy Secretary, got everyone's ears pricking up when he referred to some ambiguities in the existing AUKUS agreement. Obviously, everyone was very pleased and relieved at Donald Trump's general backing of AUKUS. He's clearly in with it. That's great. Wonderful to have that signal and that reassurance. In terms of the review being carried out by Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary, Phelan, I suppose, clarified that he's looking to clarify ambiguities. Yeah. So everyone's wondering what that refers to. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really interesting question. It's ambiguous in itself, Dave, because he didn't explain it. And really interestingly, as soon as he said it, the president responded saying, "You're fixing it." Yeah. So everybody was able to move on. Clearly, it's not fatal to the partnership. As you said, President Trump, the entire American system supports AUKUS. Which is great news. We can now move on from, I think, what was too much of a fixation of is the partnership going to continue. I don't think there was ever really a realistic a likelihood that the US were going to say we're not going to work with Australia and the UK here. But interestingly, when our Prime Minister was asked after the meeting, what did the Secretary of Navy mean by ambiguities? Is it an issue? The Prime Minister sought to downplay it. And the Prime Minister and Australia might know what's in the Pentagon review. So when he seeks to downplay it, maybe that's a message that says it's not an issue. But the fact that the Secretary of Navy, who was the only person to speak in that meeting, other than the two leaders, President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese, I think it means there's something there. It's something there, at least, that the Navy wants to be addressed. So what is it? Well, it's clearly not terminating the partnership. That's going on full steam ahead, as Trump said. Some people have said, well, is it to do with what has come up previously about maybe some Americans want to retain operational control over the Virginias that are going to be sold to Australia? I think that's unlikely because we are purchasing those Virginias, but there's clearly something there. So what could it be? Well, it could very well be related to, for example, the certification process. In which the in-service submarines that we're getting need to be certified before they're transferred. So it's not a new product. It's not a commercial transaction that we're ordinarily used to. This is about the transfer of an in-service submarine. So the US side need to be satisfied that they've done everything at their end. Always question marks about their submarine industrial base, how ready they are. I think importantly, it's not just about how ready the Americans are to transfer the ship. It may very well be about Australia's readiness and preparation for receiving the submarine, the boat. So there may be some things that the US Navy need to be feel need to be addressed.
This is interesting. So, I mean, to me, and look, I'm not an AUKUS expert, but I follow it as much as I can. But the outstanding risk to me still seems to be the output of US Virginias in terms of stage 2 of the AUKUS agreement. They're currently at whatever it is, 1.3, and they need to get to 2.3. I forget the exact numbers, but everyone's relatively familiar with that there's a shortfall that is not inconsiderable. So, I mean, is an equivalent risk that Australia is not ready to receive them, as opposed to the US's risk of not being able to actually deliver them? I haven't really thought about it that way. I mean, obviously some work is being put into Henderson, and there was the announcement from from the PM and the Minister for Defence a few weeks ago to that effect. But I mean, that is generally seen to be a risk in itself?
I think I think both have to be satisfied, and which is why a lot of work is going into our shipyards. Obviously, Sterling here is very important, but it's not the only thing, the only shipyard area that the US will be focused on. They will be looking to ensure that Australia comprehensively is able to dock these ships, operate these ships from a shipyard perspective, also from a personnel perspective. So are they looking to make sure that we have a certain number of personnel who are trained to be able to crew and maintain these boats, which are the crown jewels of the American military. So there may be a range of those issues that are probably more relevant at this stage for the Navy than they are for politicians.
Yep. I've got to say, Phelan handled it fairly well, I thought. I mean, I'm glad he was paying attention. We've all been in those meetings where we zone out and the biggest person in the room suddenly turns to us and says, "What do you think?" And I've been caught out plenty of times on that.
I suppose the other thing that I think is important here is that I do think there is a fixation that, whether it be journalists or think tanks, commentators have on changes to agreements or changes to timelines. I think that we should really get into a practice and a discussion where if something happens that requires change, if there are delays, if there's timeliness issues, if there's something happens in global events to impact something that we thought was going to happen in 2021 or 2023, I think there should be a willingness to say, well, we want our own government, we want the AUKUS governments to be explaining why we might need to shift something.
Sure.
Technology might change that requires a slight shift. That's why the partnership is so important. I think we want to be able to incentivize change where it's needed, rather than to say, if you change something that you've signed years ago, if you change anything at all, we're going to report that or regard that as a failure. And there might be failures, but I think this is a huge endeavor, generational endeavor, and it's a complex pathway. Involves rotation of US and UK submarines. That might be where the ambiguities are. It involves the transfer of Virginias, and then it involves the design and development of SSN AUKUS. There's a lot happening here. I think we should be willing to understand that some things there might be obstacles that come up, but we're working together to push through them. I think that's okay.
So I mean, that's a very reasonable point. I guess it raises the question, though, of, I mean, has anything changed since the original agreement was signed that would require the clarification of ambiguities? Matthew Knott in the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age is reporting that one of the ambiguities might be about continued access of US and UK submarines to HMAS Sterling in Western Australia. If that is the case, now it might just be a routine kind of clarification. The US and the UK want to know that they will have continued access to rotate through there, that all three countries agree that a greater rather than a lesser ongoing presence into the 30s and 40s of all three nations' boats is better for the Indo-Pacific all round. But might it point to some accumulated concern that the US and UK are going to need to be there in a heavier presence for longer than might have been envisaged when the agreement was originally signed, either because the US is realizing we might not have enough Virginias, or the Australians and the US together are realizing Australia might not have the capacity, the personnel, the training, the just general ability to actually take the Virginias on in the 1930s. Well, we could go backwards in time 100 years if we had a time machine, but the 2030s. So, I mean,
hopefully
I guess
the 2030s aren't like the
1930s,
yeah.
exactly. But well, plenty have made the comparison.
The answer is yes. I think for us though, what we need to be actually wanting the AUKUS partners to do is to have this conversation regularly, ongoing, really, no matter what exact lines are in the agreement. If there is something happens that means that Australia's shipyards are not at a point where the Americans want, well, let's have that discussion, but not have it as, well, that there is a delay there, therefore we are failing and we have to acknowledge defeat.
Yep. We
want the three countries to say, right, here's what we've said. We're going to transfer the Virginias 2032 by memory from 2032, but we also want them to say, let's ensure that we are having such a regular conversation that if we need to, we might shift our rotational arrangements that we didn't quite envisage when the arrangement was first announced in 21 or the pathway was signed in 2023. So I think, like with any bilateral arrangement, any business arrangement, I think what the public should actually be asking of the three governments is, don't wait until 2032 and say, oh, are we ready or not, either from a US submarine industrial base or an Australian perspective or from a British perspective, because all three countries have actually said we've got known issues within our submarine industrial base and our defence industrial base. It's remembering the reason that AUKUS has come together, we acknowledged our vulnerabilities leading into 2021. To say that the military and tech rise of China, including their own uplift in their navy, meant that we needed to be greater than the sum of our parts. We needed the partnership to come together, and that it wasn't simply to give Australia access to submarines. It was because the Americans and the Brits said we all need to uplift, and we can do so better together. More conversations, even if they result in some change, the partnership here is actually important. To give an example, without the partnership, the three defence departments probably wouldn't have identified as greatly as they have all the obstacles or restrictions to information sharing and tech sharing. You know, it is unheralded, really, but they have already done a lot of work to both identify and to loosen the restrictions so that the three countries are able to talk more, share more. That is a good thing.
Okay, good. All right. The third really interesting element out of the Trump-Albanese meeting was Trump's comments on Taiwan. He was very confident that between the majesty of the U.S. military and its strength and its deterrent effect, and his personal ability to persuade Xi Jinping, between those two things, Xi would not consider moving against Taiwan during this term of Trump's administration, which goes through to 2028. What did you make of those comments? Did they sound overly complacent? Did they sound as if he has an unhealthily rosy picture of China's intentions? What do you think?
I think the view that some commentators have expressed that Trump saying that President Xi didn't want to invade Taiwan showed a view that Trump thought China was benign or that China wasn't a threat. I think that's an incorrect reading. I think that wherever Trump is, and he happened to be there in the context of the Australian meeting, the meeting with the Australian Prime Minister, but this was not a message to the Australian Prime Minister or the journalists who asked the question. In my view, this was him talking directly to President Xi, saying, not on my watch. Because, as you said, he linked it directly with the might and power of US military. If Trump didn't think there was a threat at all, why would he have to refer to the deterrent effect of the US military? Unquestionably, Trump sees China as a threat. What I think he is saying in his own way, he's always negotiating, he's always messaging, he is saying that he does not want President Xi to think that invading militarily, and of course everyone is saying that President Xi has said before that by 2027, not in, but by 2027, the PLA needs to be ready. Trump is saying, not on my watch. And I think it is important to point out that my view and a lot of analysts agree that China, the President Xi, doesn't want to have to militarily invade Taiwan. What President Xi's ideal outcome is to take over Taiwan without having to fire a shot, just through political warfare, hybrid warfare. And so I think when you talk about, when you mention is it complacency, I think that the greater problem here is not that are we seeing a president in President Trump, a US president who doesn't think China is a threat. I don't think that's right at all. I think it is the greater threat that we have is that we say the only red line we have is a military invasion. Because what will be happening in the meantime, what is happening already, is that China is using its hybrid political warfare to undermine both Taiwan's willpower, Taiwan's democratic systems, and the rest of us, so that we wake up one day and the takeover has happened without the military. And so that's why we need to do everything we can to actually say to President Xi, the only way you will unilaterally take over Taiwan is by force. That's the only way you're going to do it. Simultaneously, we need to deter him from thinking he can use that force. So that's the game. That's the mission that I think we are in.
So that's definitely one area of concern. I think you raise a good point there that that the below the red line activity could be one source of worry. I got to say another source of worry for me is just Trump's utter confidence in his own ability to control other people, other leaders, other events around the world. Clearly, he feels this way about Xi Jinping. He talks about their relationship. He talks about, well, he indicates that the charm, the friendship, that side of the relationship he has with Xi Jinping, but also the intimidating nature of US power. I suppose I worry that there is some overconfidence there. I mean, this is part of Trump's entire political persona, right? I have this magic ability to do deals, to shape reality around me. Now, he has proven remarkably adept at that in many ways. I mean, the obvious flaw, and we'll get to Russia and Ukraine in a moment, is his complete blind spot with Vladimir Putin. He's just been convinced that he could persuade Putin through the force of his personality to make a reasonable agreement on Ukraine. That hasn't happened. So that right there, that is a demonstration that Trump's judgment about his own abilities is not always perfect. I guess my worry here is that he might be making the same mistake with Xi Jinping and Taiwan. We will find out a little bit more about this is it next week, I think, when Trump and Xi are expected to sit down in Seoul at APEC. They will have a discussion about the broad relationship. I think Trump has indicated that he expects Taiwan to be part of that conversation. Obviously, he also expects trade, investment, the economic relationship to be part of it. I think probably Trump skeptics and national security, I hate the term, hawks, quite understandably worried that there could be some trade-offs made there. What do you expect out of that conversation? And what are your thoughts, I guess, on the points that I've just made?
I agree. I think we've just seen this week the bilateral meeting between President Trump and Anthony Albanese, of course, exceptionally important for Australia. This meeting, I think on the 30th at APEC, as you say, between President Trump and President Xi has such a global impact. It is not just about US, China. Depending on what, if anything, they agree, it will have an impact on the world. And so what we don't want to see is exactly what you said. We don't want to see any potential for a trade agreement to impact security in any way. So there are a number of things to be looking at where the agreement goes beyond how many soybeans are going to be exported and imported. If that agreement has implications for security, whether it be of Taiwan or the South China Sea, or frankly around issues like TikTok and the restrictions and exports on advanced chips, those are the areas of concern. I think what's interesting, Dave, for me in all this is that this question of President Trump's style. I agree with you. You've referred to it as his personal projection of power. I think, unfortunately, Trump can often flatter those people, those leaders he sees as adversaries, and he can treat almost with a wire brush his allies and friends. I don't like that. I don't like that. I think there should be a greater separation between adversaries and allies. The but here is that it doesn't mean that there aren't adversaries and allies. The AUKUS deal with Australia shows the relationship with an ally. So what we have to also look at is beyond the power, the personal power of Trump, where's the US system here? And you would ordinarily expect the intel community, the Pentagon, like it is in Australia in terms of the intel community or Department of Defense, to have a particular view about China's military and tech rise. That's people expect that. As you say, people say, oh, well, you're just a China hawk. I think what's really telling, really instructive, is look at the US Treasury Secretary Bessent's commentary and judgment and assessment on China. He has said through the course of the week, in response to the way that China is coercing the world in relation to tech companies and rare earth exports, that China has taken a bazooka to the world. It's not a bazooka to the US, it's a bazooka to the world. So that's the Treasury Secretary. And there is a element of real importance when the economic agencies and the intel agencies or the defense agencies are so aligned. And in what is a hugely polarized US system, the pacing threat element of China is one of the only elements that binds the US system across all sectors. So I think that is an important one. The system there is clearly saying we know we've got a problem, and in a way, the lead into these meetings, whether it be the Albanese meeting with Trump or Trump's meeting with Xi, in a way, we're seeing why we need to treat this so seriously. That we are in the lead up, China has been bullying and attempting to coerce the Dutch government over a company called Nexperia. They have released flares, the aircraft released flares in front of an Australian P-8 in the South China Sea.
Which apparently was heading into Chinese
That's right, it was all our fault.
Airspace,
yeah. They have continued to bully the UK in relation to, while the spy case has been going on, in relation to what is known as the mega embassy, and have made it very clear that if the UK doesn't give China what they want with an embassy in London, that China will punish the UK. And of course, then we've seen in the last week China tell the entire world that we are so confident and powerful on our production, processing, and export of rare earths that we're going to harm you all unless you all fall into line. This is all the context that leads into the President Trump, President Xi meeting. So we all want to see calmness. We want to see stability. We don't want to see the economic coercion. We don't want to see military intimidation. But what we need to focus on is not simply saying, in response to economic coercion, in response to military intimidation, we better give Beijing what it wants so that we can have stability. Because if we give Beijing what they want, they'll just take it, they'll bank it, and they'll continue to intimidate. So this is where the rest of us need to look to President Trump to say, right, we all trade with China. Australia trades with China. Prime Minister Albanese went on a 6-day trip to China, dominated by trade and investment. So we appreciate that America and China should be looking at trade. What we can't afford to have is that meeting on trade and investment compromise security and sovereignty.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's desperately hope that that's the case. All right. Big news yesterday and overnight, our time in Australia. Trump has thankfully put new sanctions on Russia, on 2 oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, this follows the cancellation of the meeting between Trump and Putin that was planned in Budapest, or is it Budapest? I don't know. I always sound, I feel pretentious mispronouncing things, even if it's the correct pronunciation. Budapest. Now, so that came after Rubio's phone call with Sergei Lavrov. This is interesting. I reckon Rubio got off the call with Lavrov and said, "Mr. President, there is no point in having this meeting. I've just spoken to Lavrov. They are not budging an inch. You will be wasting your time if you sit down with Putin. And in fact, you will just be giving him a gift." So, I mean, that's just my complete speculation. But if so, I think it's a reassuring show of influence from Rubio, because I mean, clearly Trump likes these sorts of meetings. He likes talking to Putin. He likes sitting down with Putin, and it's a great sign of progress if Trump has said, "Bugger that, I'm not sitting down with Vladimir again." And in fact, he said something to the effect that, I have these conversations with Vladimir, they're great conversations, and then nothing comes of it. Thank God he's woken up to that. Putin responded overnight, quote, "This is an unfriendly act towards Russia." Good. "And it doesn't strengthen relations between Russia and the United States." Good. That only just began to get restored, he said. So, I mean, clearly every time Trump sits down with Putin, things go backwards. That's my view. Putin went on to say, "No self-respecting country and no self-respecting people ever decide anything under pressure." Well, Ukraine could obviously take the same position. But look, basically, as long as this is enforced properly, because Russia's shadow fleets are still, working at a great pace, and the previous the Biden era sanctions against the other big Russian oil companies, I think there were two that were sanctioned. They had some effect, although the gaps still allowed Russia to trade oil, and obviously they've still got the gas exports as well. But if you look at the fact that, I mean, crude exports, oil and gas make up a quarter of Russia's federal budget. There are signs that China and India already may move away from Russian oil imports. There's a piece in the Financial Times overnight indicating that. And 80% of Russia's crude exports go to China and India. So, we could actually see some significant shifts here. Now, Russia experts are saying, well, look, Putin is very, very resilient on these questions. For him, Ukraine is existential. This is not fundamentally going to change his position on Ukraine. I find that to be defeatist and fatalistic. My view is, look, this imposes a real cost, this kind of stuff on Russia. They might deny it. They might say, we'll be fine, we can manage. But their economy is already struggling. They've shifted to a war economy that takes a productive activity away from civil things that actually provide for ordinary people's day-to-day well-being. I reckon you just keep on taking this paint off and that will start to have an effect. So I think it's crazy to say, okay, this isn't going to help. I think it does all add up and it's got to be done. Let's put some more pressure. I would love to see some long-range missiles provided to Ukraine, the Tomahawks. Putin again put a very, very stark warning on the table saying, consequences will be, I forget the exact phrase that he used, something like severe and perhaps startling. And I'm not sure that we can be startled in this day and age. But look, my view is best news I've heard in a long time. Well, the critical minerals deal was great too, but in terms of Russia-Ukraine, this is just a fantastic bit of progress. I would love to see some more supplies to Ukraine to help it. But really, let's continue the pressure on Russia and then drag Putin to the negotiating table once that pressure is in place.
I completely agree. And I think that the fact that Putin has made such a statement, I think is telling in itself. I think that while Putin felt that he could manage the situation to his benefit, keep pushing back any sense of a ceasefire, which of course he is the one who hasn't been agreeing to. I think where he feels his best work is done is behind the scenes, where he feels similarly. We're talking about people who have a sense of their ability to convince people to do things that might not be in their own best interests and are in his interests. He's happy for that to happen. So the fact that he has come out very defensively, saying this is an unfriendly act, I think, to me, that does suggest a sense that this decision by President Trump, informed by, as you say, the conversation that Secretary Rubio had with Lavrov, I think that was the exact right decision. And as much as Putin's statement says you don't act from a position of being under pressure, I mean, that's just wholly wrong. Unfortunately, we, democracies know it better than any that we unfortunately do act when we're under pressure. We shouldn't act as much as we do when we're under pressure.
Totally.
But we clear see it. And whether it be Russia or Iran, I mean, let's have a look at Iran over the last 18 months. They've had to take certain actions that they don't like because of all the pressure that they're under. And that happens around the world. So I agree with you. All of these sanctions, are they stopping Russia's war effort? No. But do they all add up? The answer is yes. And as you say, if India, if particularly China, who is the main enabler of Russia, if they have to pare back a bit because of the sanctions, then that is really going to hurt Putin. So I do think that this is good news, as you say. An area that I'm a little bit worried about, I suppose, Dave, is that we still can't, as the West, the traditional West, as the NATO and NATO plus partners, we still can't seem to coordinate as well as we should to put the extra pressure on Putin. Because, as you say, some excellent news in terms of no meeting between Trump and Putin, sanctions on these two Russian oil firms from the US, significant stuff that will have an impact on the likes of China being able to purchase Russian oil. All very, very good. But simultaneously, overnight, the second part, which is good, is that we have had also, I think, the 19th round of EU sanctions against Russia. They have been able to put sanctions on areas like crypto that will impact what Russia is doing. And I think this 19th round from the EU directly targets some Chinese entities that are involved, which is excellent as well. We should have been doing this long ago. But simultaneously, there was a meeting at the EU meeting. The EU didn't reach agreement on what I think they should have reached agreement on, which was to agree to a proposal coming out of the European Commission to use frozen Russian assets to help fund Ukraine's economy and war effort. Why is that a big deal? What we again would be saying, just as you said about why it's important for the US to show Russia that the US is in this for Ukraine in the long haul, this would be the European Union both supporting Ukraine, but also saying to Russia that we can last for years here. Because my understanding is there's something like 140 billion euros worth of assets, largely housed in Belgium. They host the financial institution that's responsible for these frozen assets. And my understanding of what has happened overnight is that while I think the overwhelming majority of EU members wanted to agree to the use of the assets for Ukraine, Belgium was the holdout, fearing, as I understand it, legal consequences, that if someone took them to court to say, well, now Belgium, you have to pay back the $140 billion. I must say, I'm confused by it because who is it going to be? Russia who takes the EU or Belgium to court? I think that we should be in a position where the EU should be willing to take that risk. If it's purely Belgium holding out, well, I think hopefully the European countries will talk to Belgium. If Belgium is asking the other EU members to share any form of risk, to spread the financial risk, I think they should be willing to do that as well. I think it's been pushed back to the European Commission to come up with such a proposal. What it means, though, is it's unlikely to be discussed again by the EU until December. It means that the assets probably won't be released at the earliest until sometime in 2026.
Yep.
What we need to see is a clear statement from the EU that says, yes, we're going to use these frozen Russian assets against you, Russia, against you, Putin, which will mean that we're saying to you that Ukraine and the EU can last for years when you can't.
Nothing would make me happier, and I completely agree. If it comes down to it, the rest of the EU members should come up with some sort of indemnity mechanism that ensures that Belgium is covered.
Yeah.
As you say, you're a lawyer, I'm not, but the unlikely circumstance that Russia or some Russian citizen sues to get their money back for their bloody yachts or their large houses in Knightsbridge or whatever the investments are that are all funneled through. Through Brussels.
It's exactly right. Conscious of time, and we've covered the issues that have really had a lot of the media airplay this week, and will continue to do so, particularly as we look forward to APEC. But I think it also useful, as you've alluded to maybe address simultaneously topics that haven't been covered as much, and what happened, what appear to be some of your favourite topics, Dave.
I'm so glad you asked, Justin. The story that really caught my eye this week was the new statement from a collection of AI experts, but a surprising number of other high-profile public figures. So this is all done through the Future of Life Institute, which is a very interesting sort of AI safety organization, originally funded by Elon Musk, interestingly enough, set up by primarily by a Swedish physicist turned AI expert called Max Tegmark. Brilliant guy, wrote a book called Life 3.0. It's a few years old now, but if you haven't read it and you're interested in AI, I strongly recommend it. But anyway, this is there have been a few statements like this that the FOL has tended to coordinate. The latest one, I'm just going to read it out. We call for a prohibition on the development of superintelligence not lifted before there is, 1, broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely and controllably, and 2, strong public buy-in. So these statements, comparable statements, have been made before. They're generally considered, or described as pause letters. So calling for a pause in the development of frontier AI development, either general intelligence or in this case, superintelligence. Now, a lot of the usual suspects have, I don't mean that pejoratively, because these are all heroes of mine, but Yoshua Bengio, Stuart Russell, Jeff Hinton, etc., have all signed it. They're the big names in both in AI and AI safety. Yoshua Bengio, the Canadian AI expert, he's actually, and one of the so-called godfathers of machine learning, he is the most cited researcher on the planet in any field.
I did not know that.
There you go. Now, so they all signed it, but the collection of other celebrities who they got is really quite staggering. So Steve Bannon was one. That took me by surprise. Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, I think it is. I'm not sure whether that helps the cause or not, but anyway. Glenn Beck, the right-wing media guy in the US. Stephen Fry. will.i.am, the Black Eyed Peas singer. Kate Bush. That one really got me over the line personally. I'm a huge fan of Kate Bush. This is an embarrassing admission, but Wuthering Heights, her first huge hit is one of my favorite all-time songs. It's the one, if I get drunk and go to bed, if I go to bed a little bit under the influence, I almost always put on my noise-cancelling headphones and listen to Wuthering Heights. Kate Bush wrote it when she was 19, which is extraordinary, and it was the album that it was off was the first UK #1 album that had been entirely written by a woman. Kate Bush is a absolute glass ceiling shatterer.
I'm sure the viewers are enjoying learning a little bit more about your interests as well, Dave.
Anyway, she's also got excellent judgment on artificial intelligence and the associated risks. A few other signatories who are worth mentioning: Roman Yampolsky, who we will have as a speaker at the Sydney Dialogue in December. Very much looking forward to hosting Roman. Connor Lee, good friend of Aspie's, came to last year's Sydney Dialogue and has been on our podcast a couple of times. Dan Hendricks, one of the world's leading AI safety researchers, who is coming on the podcast in the next week or two. So I'm very much looking forward to interviewing Dan. Now, so the first question, Justin, do you have a view on these calls for pauses?
Well, let's reverse it, because this is well and truly your field. You have a level of expertise here that not many do.
Okay.
I mean, that is an eclectic bunch, and that is convincing in itself when people across the spectrum, whether it be politics or any sector, when they come together, that is powerful in itself. But what's your view of the statement itself?
Okay, so what tears me a little bit is that people I respect on both sides land very differently on these sorts of pause letters, and I fully understand both sides of the argument. So it actually sparked a really interesting debate on X between some big names in AI. Dean Ball, who largely wrote the Trump administration's AI action plan, very smart, very thoughtful, very nice guy. He got quite stuck into it. His point, he made a number of points. One is that it's impossible to implement. Second, he's completely against the sort of centralization of control over these sorts of things. I mean, the upshot of his objection was, and I quote, "I reject all efforts to centralize power in this way, and I reject blobby statements with no path to productive realization in policy." Now, this prompted a strong response from people like Max Tegmark, Scott Alexander, the founder of a blog called I'm blanking on the name, Slate Codex, I think it's called, Star Codex Slate. It's some wacky name like that, but one of the foremost blog sites for AI discussions. So Scott came back pretty hard, saying you could say the same thing about calls for abolition back in the day. So the abolition of slavery, that started with very, very broad statements that got signatories behind it, basically saying let's abolish slavery. Right now, people, slaveholders and pro-slavery people back then could easily have said, well, I mean, it's, half our economy is built on this. How do you implement this? Why do you make sort of blobby, high-handed statements that aren't practical to implement? So I guess where I ultimately come down, I completely understand the arguments that what happens if we enforce it? I mean, I think there are some Chinese names on this, but it's not as if the Chinese Communist Party has signed up to this statement. Global governance is an extremely difficult thing right now. So I completely understand those people who say, let's say we enforce it against ourselves, and then China continues merrily developing its way towards superintelligence. We are simply retarding our own ability whilst not having no effect on China. And if somebody's going to build superintelligence, I would rather it were the United States than China. That said, I completely sympathize with those who fear that the development of superintelligence and its destructive potential is the bigger risk here. It doesn't matter who destroys the human race, whether it's the United States or China, but if we continue racing for commercial or strategic reasons towards superintelligence, we create this very significant risk. And most of the big lab leaders all themselves are on the record having acknowledged that racing towards superintelligence does create some kind of risk. They have different numbers that they put on it, 10%, 20%, et cetera, et cetera. Do you really want to gamble with a 10% risk of rendering humanity extinct? So I guess where I come down on it ultimately is that centralization is a necessary way to harness this kind of power. You might have to monopolize this in the hands of some kind of global entity. That might well be the only way to control it. And going to Scott Alexander's point, I don't think this is really supposed to solve the problem. This is starting the discussion towards solving the problem. So that's where I come down on support for this kind of statement with a strong understanding of the objections to it.
Yeah, you're very convincing, and listening to you does impact my initial response to the pause statement was that it's just not practical or implementable. So why are they doing it? If the why is to ensure that the conversation happens, brilliant. We absolutely can't just sleepwalk into this, or we can't just doom scroll ourselves into it and then wake up one day and it's here and we're not prepared for it. So having the conversation, we've got to, though, I think, do two things at once. We've got to have the conversation while recognizing that the idea, in my view, the idea of a global pause on this research, I don't understand that. The reference to something like slavery, or any other policy like that, there's a difference between where a national government or a government has control versus a situation where a combination of commercial entities and foreign governments have as much control as you do. So we've got to be careful, in my view, not to impose on ourselves such a level of not just principle, because the principle is important, but such a level of ideology on ourselves that we're not going to do something that has no impact on whether others continue. So your point around China, I think what we've seen this year that surprised many people, didn't surprise our researchers here at ASPE, but the revelation of DeepSeek to show how far along China is with their own research and development into AI, as an example, shows that we can't stop ourselves and think that the rest of the world are going to stop along with us. It's going to happen. So how do we do two things at once? How do we engage in the conversation, ensure that governments and commercial entities are working together? But crucially, I think what we need to be able to do is to say, like we do in other fields, what can happen, what can be done versus what should be done. I still think we can't limit ourselves only to knowing what should be done and saying, we know ethically we only want to get to here, so that's all we're going to try for. We have to be, through partnerships, through AUKUS, through other mechanisms, through government, private and public sector arrangements, we have to actually know what the potential is to be able to mitigate it, to be able to prevent the worst, and also, unfortunately, to be prepared for it. It's a little bit like weapons. If you have a look at the nuclear weapons, the reality is that while you have the US and Russia having had a long-standing nuclear arms agreement, China has not wanted to sign up to anything. They are actually increasing their number of nuclear weapons. So that's why, for those people who argue, if only the US would lead the way by ridding themselves of nuclear weapons, wouldn't the world be safer? The world would actually be less safe, Dave, if the US got rid of its nuclear weapons, because there wouldn't be that deterrent on the likes of China and others. So this is a case where the same. If we believe that some bad things can happen, the answer, unfortunately, is not that we should just put our own pens down and say we're not going to work on it, because others will continue working on it.
Yeah. So the nuclear weapons analogy is probably the best one there is. One of the problems with AI, with advanced AI, I think, is that people naturally grasp for analogies, understandably. You always try to look for something, an example of where something has or hasn't worked in the past in order to try and get some kind of frame of reference for this future thing. One of the problems is that almost nothing is analogous to an idea like superintelligence.
Yeah.
Basically, no historical analogy really works as a decent comparison. Nuclear weapons are probably the best one, and I suppose leaving aside what's happened more recently, both with China's nuclear weapons expansion and also Russia gradually pulling out of aspects of non-proliferation. At least with nuclear weapons, the two then superpowers did actually manage to come up with some agreements that started to curb their development. So I guess that is on the upside, on the optimistic side, there is actually something useful there. But I think the slavery one, or for that matter, so Dean Ball, again, I have enormous respect for the guy, but he made the comparison of planes. One of his points was, how do you even know if superintelligence is safe until you've actually built it?
Yeah.
And he said, it's a bit like you couldn't decide whether a plane was safe until you built and tested it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that said, Orville Wright nearly died in a plane crash within a few years of the first successful Kitty Hawk test flight. And in fact, his co-pilot, Thomas Selfridge, did die in the same plane crash. So, those are individuals. Do you really want to run that experiment again, potentially with the fate of humanity? You don't want those sorts of odds where the continued existence of life on Earth is what's at stake. So I think, whether it's slavery or flying planes or even nuclear weapons, one of the issues that we face is that we don't actually have a lot of useful historical analogies for something like this.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's right.
These are really, really big, important, and fascinating questions. I think there are decent arguments on both sides.
I mean, very quickly read out the first statement again for our viewers. The second one being that they want a level of public awareness and trust. But the first of their 2 points, read that out again.
Well, actually, broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely and controllably.
Yeah. So in an ideal world, having broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely is wonderful. But the issue is, what does broad scientific...
It's tough.
It's tough.
Sure.
So I think that the answer here is when they say pause, what we can't take that to mean, in my view, is that we stop everything, we put pens down while the likes of China and companies that don't care about anything other than their own profits continue. We have to be able to bring everyone together, and we have to treat this as both an opportunity but also a threat to humankind. And so we have to have governments and companies come together to say, how are we going to manage the development, the inevitable development wherever it takes us? We're not going to when none of us are going to stop the technological development. It's a little bit like Terminator, Dave. You can think you've stopped Judgment Day, but then you're going to have to continue stopping Judgment Day. So here we need to be in a position to be able to say, what do we want to prevent happening? But we actually need to know what is possible to do that, and that means that we have to work together, not a pause that means a ban on research, but a pause or a coming together to say we're going to do this in an ethical way, and then we are going to be the ones who hit the target first. Just as the Americans got to nuclear weapons first, it's meant that they haven't to date had a nuclear attack because of the deterrent that they have. We need to be still in it. We desperately need to maintain a comparative advantage in this area so that as the tech develops, we are the ones in control, and we are still deterring those adversaries or malicious actors from using the tech in the worst possible way.
Right. Okay. All right. Now we're past an hour, so we've ranted for over an hour. Justin, congratulations. I'm going to have the final word. I'm going to point the second part, which tends to get missed a little bit, is strong public buy-in. They're also calling for strong public buy-in. I think that's a really, really. That's very, very difficult to argue with, because one of the big issues here is that there is virtually a handful of people making the big decisions on this particular issue, frontier AI. It's a remarkably concentrated field. I mean, the fact that Mark Zuckerberg is paying, famously $100 million salaries just to grab the most talented engineers shows how concentrated the real power is here.
So are you saying you want public buy-in?
Yes.
I don't know how that's in what other field. There's a difference, I think, between public awareness and governments and companies being open with the public to ensure that they are resilient.
Oh,
to
that's
what
the kind of
happens.
public buy-in I'm thinking
Okay.
of. I'm thinking of getting everyone more involved in this discussion. But that's a constant bugbear of mine, that people aren't talking about this more often. I know that AI gets a huge amount of attention, but it's mostly talking about whether there's a bubble or not. It's mostly in the business field, and then some sort of, I suppose, popular cultural field as well. But I think the big issues around things like AI safety are not as widely discussed in the
Your
public as they should be.
podcast with Connor Lay, brilliant on this. For those who haven't listened to it, go and find it. And it sounds like the next couple of weeks.
Dan Hendricks will be an absolute must listen. So
Great.
I'm looking forward to that. Folks, thanks for listening. We've covered a lot, and we're up to 65 minutes. So we're going to go and grab a coffee. But enjoy your weekend and enjoy listening.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks all.